Scribble Gen 0.2 has 6 new presets, and I think they're pretty fun, so let's check them out. And if you want to know how to append them or add them to your asset library, watch the beginning of the first video. As usual, links for everything will be in the description. So like I said, there are 6 new presets. We have Emit. We have a few variations with Emit dripping and fire. We have Instance on Curve, Particle Flow, Scatter, Simple Curve, and Volume Line. So with these new ones, I was going for more general use tools that could be used for a variety of situations. So let's start with Emit. We can just drag it from our asset browser right over here. We press the spacebar to make it play, and you can see basically what's happening is you draw a curve and points emit from it. So the first few options we have are realize instances, which is a new option that's going to, exist with all of the presets that use instances. And the whole thought behind this is that when you want to convert it to a mesh, if there are instances, they have to be realized or else it won't be able to be converted. So you can see if you hover over it, it'll tell you that it allows you to convert it to a mesh. So if you want to do that, you basically just set it to 1, and then you can right click it and convert to mesh. And now it's a mesh, and you can, move things around in edit mode like you would anything else. Then we have these other modes. So if you hover over this, it will tell you that 0 is for instances, 1 is points, 2 is volume, and 3 is mesh. Right now we have this set to 0, so it's using instances, and it is instancing this collection right here. You can see we have a category called instances. We also have one for volume, and it says the modes that, that use these settings. So mode 0 is instances. We can set it to points if we want, which can be rendered in cycles. They will be rendered as like perfect spheres. Now we do have volume, so if you want to make some, smoke, things like that. And we have meshed volume, which is going to take all of those points and it's going to merge them together like this. And we can, mess with this quite a bit. We have some other options to, smooth it out and things like that, but we'll talk more about that later. So let's just set this back to 0. So we have some instances right here. So if you want to control the amount of points that are being emitted, you can do that with the resolution right here. So you can make more points by making this distance smaller, like 0.005. To make this easier, I also just have a duplicate thing right here. So you can just duplicate it a bunch of times if you want it to be more dense like that. You can set it to something really high, just get like a whole wall of particles like that. And because these are all instances, they still run pretty fast. You have to turn this up pretty high before it starts slowing down. So distance is going to change how far they can actually flow. So you can set it to something shorter if you don't want it to flow as far like this, but I'll just set that back to 10. Now we have direction also, which is going to change like the global direction. Right now this is going on the z-axis, but if you want, you can make that -2, have it flow down. You also can, change the direction, make it go on the y or on the x, things like that. And you can also, rotate this in object mode to make it flow, whatever direction you want. So this could be good for, you parent this to an object, like it could be like an exhaust pipe for like a car or something, and you always have, some volume coming out of it like it's smoke, things like that. We have speed, which, does what it says. You can make it faster or slower. Speed curve does an interesting thing where when you have it set to 1, everything will just move at the same speed. But when you turn it up, you'll notice that things at the beginning move a little slower than things at the end. This is how you can create cool like dripping effects. But instead of having to set it up, I did make a variation right here. So you can just drag down the dripping effect like that, reset the rotation, and we can just drag it over here. When we press play, you can see with the speed curve, it looks a little more like dripping because they start off a little slower. They're not going to come out full speed like that. But this would be nice for if you want like a dripping ceiling, you just, scribble it down and then maybe turn the resolution down quite a bit like this. And now it's looking a little more slow, a little more random. If you want to make things drip, you can just use that preset. Now we have shrink, which is going to make the particles get smaller as they flow. And right now we have it set to 0, which means they're going to start scaling down basically as soon as they're emitted. But we can turn it up a little higher, maybe set it to like 0.9. So it's going to flow for like 90%, and then the last 10% is where it's going to start scaling down. Or if you turn it up to 1, then they just disappear at the end like that instead of scaling. So trim, if we hover over it, you can see that it says it only works when shrink is under 1. So if we have it set to 1, this will not work. But we can set it to something like 0.9, and then this will basically let us grow our curve right here. And this could be good for if you want to like start an animation with it very low and then things start flowing out. This will look a little smoother if you have shrink set to 0. It'll be a little more seamless like that. We have delete hit particles, which only works if you have a target collection right here. So we can set this to set. Let's turn on delete hit particles, and we can bring this over here so that it's like flowing into the ceiling. As you can see, particles are being deleted when they hit right here, but they are still coming through the hole like that. There can be some issues when you get really close to things. You can see some of them will start to appear up there. So I recommend just kind of like moving this away from things a little bit when you use it. Sometimes you have to move it up just a little bit so that things don't get deleted by the ground too early like that. But you don't have to move it very far and it works fine. So now we have noise, which is how we get this turbulence effect right here. So right now it's set to 5, but you know, if you want, you can turn it up and down, you know, whatever you want. And you can change it on each axis. So if you don't want it to be distorted on the Z axis, then you can just set that to 0. And now it won't go, you know, it won't be distorted up and down, or you can turn it up really high, whatever you want. W is going to do normal, typical noise texture stuff. This is like a seed. We also have W speed. If you want the W to change over time, then you can do that. It's a little more noticeable when you turn it up high, but I think just setting it to something smaller like 0.2 is a pretty good effect. Now, similarity is basically going to give each particle a slightly different W. Right here, it's going to give it a slightly different seed. If you don't want them to look like they're flowing with each other in the same pattern, then you can turn this up to something a little higher. And now these will just look a little more scattered, but they'll all move about the same speed. Then we have, you know, normal things like scale and detail and things like that. So the next category is for modes 0 and 1. So it's going to deal with like the instances like we're using now, or the points. So this is to override the material. If you want all of the instances to use a material, then you set the material up here to whatever you want, and then you just turn this to 1 and it will use that. The minimum and maximum scale is going to use a noise texture to change the scale. So right now we have it set to 0.2 for everything, but we can change this to 0, and you'll notice that some of them scale down. You can make this bigger, and you'll notice like some pockets where things scale down occasionally, and sometimes they scale up, and this adds a little bit of variety, makes things look more kind of cloudy. And of course you can change, you know, the size of this texture. It's pretty noticeable where the texture is when you have a lot of particles and you're, you know, moving the scale like this. We have noise rotation. So if we set this to 0, everything will be pointing straight up like that. What's happening is I'm using the same noise texture that is pushing the points around and using that to rotate it also. And then we also have random rotation if you want to just have these, you know, look more scattered. So they're just all rotated randomly now. Okay, next is for modes 2 and 3. So we have to go back to the top, change this to, let's change it to volume right here. So we have the option to change the density like that. And this will also change it on the shader end too. So we can go into EV and you can see this is what our preview looks like in EV, but we can turn the density up if you want, you know, thicker smoke. Now we have voxel size, which is going to change the quality basically. If you want these to look more crisp, then you can turn this down to like 0.02 or something. And now there's a little more definition. You can also change the minimum and maximum scale, just like the same way that we were doing with the instances. I think this is pretty important for the volume, because if you have it both set to the same thing, it looks very thick and uniform in a way that I think it just doesn't look as good, in my opinion. And then we have noise range, which we also have for instances, but it's a little easier to notice what's happening with the volume. This is going to change like the hardness of the noise texture, if that makes any sense. When we turn this down, you'll start to notice that there are pockets that kind of form. And let's just try turning this down, actually. It might be easier to tell when it's lower. Yeah, so right here, it's getting a lot smaller. And this is something that would normally get smaller anyway, because we have the minimum scale set to 0. When the noise range is high, this will be a more gradual change. And when you turn it down really low, it will just eventually be at a point where it's like, you know, these are the maximum scale, this is the minimum scale, like that. So this is how you can change like the transition range, basically. Now, smooth mesh only works when we have this set to mode 3, which is taking all of those points and remeshing them. So this will go quite a bit slower when you start turning the smooth mesh up. So if you want, you can always just add in a smooth modifier after right here. And this will work basically the same way. It is a little faster. So when you have this set to 0, it will still run relatively fast. And if you want, you can turn it up high to something like 80, and it will become a lot more liquidy like this. It looks a lot better when you have the scaling up and down like this. So we'll just turn this a little higher though. And also when we have a lot of duplicates like this. If you have it set to something low, then it's very blobby. It's just like a lava lamp or something like that. And if you want, you don't have to use this material right here. Right now it's set to volume. So we could set it to something like chrome. And now we have this like liquid chrome flowing effect. And I think it looks pretty cool. So you saw the dripping effect, but we also have fire, which is using the same exact node group right here. It's just that I changed a lot of the settings in here to make it look more like fire, as you can see here. And this is running in real time. You know, it's pretty performant. It's basically using a whole bunch of image cards like this. So I just made one image card, and it changes depending on where it is and what angle you're looking at. There is a limitation right now with Blender 3.3 that I'll update in 3.4, and it has to do with how instances are handled. But basically what I wanted to do is have some parts be brighter and also have it fade away at the end, but you can't really do that with instances in Blender 3.3. So right now they're just scaling down at the top, which I think looks okay, but it is something that I will update in the future. And because this is very performant, you can use this in situations for like stylized fire, things like that. And it's a lot of fun to use. You can just draw it on things, and you know, it just starts going. Have a campfire, things like that. And because this is using the same emit node group, you can change things the same way over here. If you want things to be lower, if you want it to be blowing in a different direction, then you can do that. So this isn't an issue with Eevee, it's just a cycles thing. But if you notice that you're getting a bunch of black spots in cycles, you just need to turn up your transparent bounces and your total bounces, you know, and that should clear the issue up, as you can see right here. This is mostly just to show people how many different things you can actually do with these node groups right here, with these presets. All right, next we have instance on curve, which is an interesting one. And it basically just does exactly what it says, where you draw a curve and then it instances things onto that curve. So this is the collection that I have in here by default, but I do have some other collections in the pack now just for testing things out. So we have books, grass, mushrooms, profiles. This is for something a little bit later. And we have rocks. This one right here is built into it, and it's one that just has like cones and flags and stuff. I thought this was a good one to test it out. So let's check out some of these options. First, we have overall scale, which is just going to scale everything up and down. And it's also going to keep instances like the same distance from each other. Resolution is going to be how close the instances are. So if you want them to be closer, you can just turn this down and it's a shorter distance. Target collection, you're going to want to set if you want these to rotate according to what they're being drawn on. So let's put this at set right here. And now you can see they are sticking out like away from the ground like that. And this is pretty helpful for things like, you know, hills, or if you want, you can even just like draw them on walls and things like this, and they will react to like the angle of the wall like that. This is another one that is very like general use. So I added a lot of options so you can customize it to make it work for whatever you want. So we do have enable collision. So right now you can kind of push it everywhere. It'll float in the air and stuff like that. If you have collision on, it won't let you drag it through the ground like that. And if you have it set to snap to surface, then you won't ever be able to move it from the surface, which is actually pretty handy if you're like drawing between pillars like this. There won't be any floating in the air if you have it set to snap to surface, but if you turn that off, you will get some that kind of float in the air. So if you want things to snap to the surface, turn on snap to surface. Now we have some other options under here. Realize instances, just so you can convert it to a mesh. Like I said before, you can change the collection you have right here. We also have show curve, which is just going to, you know, show the curve that you're drawing. This is mostly just for reference and things like that. The curve won't render when you render it out. You won't be able to see it. Then we have these other few options, which is going to change how they're rotated. So this one is surface, normal, and tangent. So we have this set to 0, so it's using the surface. You can hover over things to get little descriptions of them. But right now, this is paying attention to the surface that is being drawn on and rotating based on that. But if you want, you can make it so that it follows the normal of the curve or the tangent. And then also which axis, which axis it's paying attention to is right here, the X, Y, and Z. So if you want it to pay attention to the surface, but you don't want it to be pointing, straight out on the Z axis, you can change this to something else also. This just makes it more reusable for other different types of objects and stuff. Now, alignment influence is going to, if you have this set to 0, everything will be pointing its original direction like that, or you can, have it somewhere in between. This is going to be nice for things like, plants, things like that. If you want things to always be pointing a little up, then you'll be able to do that like that. So now they're not pointing straight out. They're always at an angle, kind of pointing up. We have random instance order. So by default, this is turned on, but if you turn it off, it'll pay attention to, all of the objects that you have in the collection that you're scattering, and it will just alternate them. So right now, we draw a really long curve, and it will always go flag, cone, just in that same order, unless random instance order is on like that, and then it will just randomize it. We have some transform options. If you want, you can, change the location and stuff like that. You can change how they're rotated, and you can change the scale, things like that. And then we have a random transform, which is going to randomize a lot of stuff. So let's make a longer line real quick. Now we have noise strength. So if we turn that up, things will just start floating all over the place, basically. This is going to work better if you have snap to surface turned on. Now it'll basically just take your line that you drew and make it not as clean. So, it'll start pushing things around like that. And, like all other noise textures, you have these other options like W, you have the scale, you have detail. And now there's also random rotation, which is just going to add a random rotation to each object, each instance right here. So I have it set to randomly rotate the Z axis. So if we look from the top, you can see all of these will be rotated a little differently, but we can turn it off, and now they're all facing the same direction. These ones are supposed to be planted in the ground, so it doesn't really make sense to use these ones, but I added them in here, in case people wanted to use them for different types of objects. We also have uniform scale. This is to randomize the scale if you want them to just scale up and down, without being warped and stuff. These other scale options right here is if you actually want them to warp. So for some things like rocks and things like that, you might not really care if they're being stretched out too much. So this is a way you can get a lot of random shapes really fast, make your instances look a little different, So one of the variations that I might add in soon, it's not in here now, but you can just make it yourself if you want, is having the ability to draw books onto bookshelves. So you can change this from road work to books. And now we have a bunch of books right here, but they're a little smaller. So we have to turn the scale up to 1. And I'm also going to turn the random rotation off. And we want these to all be closer to each other. So we can turn the resolution down, make them closer like that. And if you want these to actually rotate in the right direction like that. We're going to have to change this to tangent like that, and we'll change the axis right here. And now you can see we have a whole bunch of books lined up. If you want them to look less uniform, you know, because they're all the same size right now, then you can just go over to random transform, and we're not going to want to scale them up on the x-axis because they'll go through each other, but we can scale them up on the z and the y right here. And now we'll get a whole bunch of, you know, different shaped books right here, and they're all different colors too. Now you can add some gaps in here if you want with the delete instances right there. So start turning that up, and we have some that are near each other, other ones that are not so much. It's just more scattered. And if you want to randomize anything, you can just change the seed. This is going to, basically anything that has a seed is going to be affected by this, and it'll just randomize everything. So that is the instance on curve preset. We have particle flow now, which is pretty similar to the particle emit one, except with this one, you can draw the path where you want the particles to flow like that. But this is going to have a lot of the same options. So let's slow this down, actually set it to like 0.2. You can see it's flowing a lot more slowly now. We have like all the same options pretty much. So we have the mode. So right now it's using instances, but we can make it use points or volume. This one's a little harder to see, but we do have volume in there, and we have the meshed volume also. You know, the ability to realize instances, you can change the quantity of the points right here. So now we have a whole lot more. We also have shrink right here, but there is a limitation with the way I'm doing it in this one. One of the limitations right now is if you have more than one curve, it will basically treat all of the curves as if they're one continual curve. That's just a limitation that I have no control over right now, but hopefully in future versions, maybe in Blender 3.4, I'll be able to do something about that. You can see the first curve that we drew is not shrinking down to 0. It's just kind of continuing right here. And the same thing with trim. If we trim it, it's going to trim each one like that instead of treating them like individual curves. Now we also have collision options. So I'll make this set, and we can enable collision. And this will make it so that, you know, nothing will go through the floor right here, which can be pretty nice if you want things to be like sliding on the floor, or maybe some like some stylized water or things like that. We also have snap to surface. You know what that does. Now we have random spread, and that's just going to spread all of these apart like you see here. So I can set this to 0, and now the only shape you'll get is from the noise right here, which we can turn up or down like that. We have the W, we have W speed, just like with the other one. And we have similarity, scale, detail, basically all the same options that we had with emit. Now all of these options should be the same as emit. That's all for instances. And then we have the options for volume also. I do really like this one for making things like stylized water. So we could just set the mode to 3 like this. And this looks a little weird in Eevee, but you'll get the idea. Basically, we can just draw whatever shape we want and then make sure collision is on and bring it down to the floor. And now this is kind of like water flowing like this. It'll just flow wherever you draw it. This is something, if you wanted, you could also make like a waterfall, something like that. So to do that, I think it would make sense to do only first. Then you can draw something like that. So it's like coming out of the wall now like that. We have scatter, and this is one where you're not going to see anything until you set a target collection. So let's just set this to set. So you can see we have some mushrooms here. This is the default collection that we use. And let's check out some of the options. So like with the instance on curve, we have the overall scale. You can just, you know, push all of these up. We have a resolution, which is going to be important for when you want to draw on things that are very small. You might have to turn the resolution length down. We have radius, which is going to change how far these actually spread. Like that. And the radius is also something that you can change in edit mode with Alt S, which is just going to change the radius right here. That's the shortcut for it, is Alt S like that. So if we draw this near our character right here, we can actually get this to spread up the character like that because they're all in the same collection. And I think it's just really fun to play with. Now we do have some other options, like we have the realize instances if you want to turn it into an object. We have show guide, which similar to the instance on curve, it's going to show like the area that they're being scattered in like this. And this also shows you the resolution. So if you turn this up, you'll notice the resolution gets quite a bit lower. So yeah, if you're noticing that things aren't showing up where you draw them, maybe try turning the guide on and it'll help you, see things a little better. We have density minimum and maximum, and this is going to control like how things are scattered basically. So we can turn the density max up quite a bit, and this is gonna, make way more mushrooms. But if we don't want them to be overlapping, that's when we would change the density minimum. So we can turn this up a little until they're not overlapping as much. There's scale at edge, which is going to determine like how small things can actually get out at the edge right here. So if we set it to 0, things will scale down basically, infinitely small like that. But we can just turn it up to something, like 0.5 or something. This is also going to control like the maximum scale in the middle right there. So keep that in mind. Again, we have a seed if you want to randomize where all of these are scattered and things like that. And we have alignment influence just like instance on curve. This is going to be helpful for, vertical walls like this. If you don't want them to stick out, you can just turn that down a little and they will all point upward a little more. Next, we have random transform. So if I move the W right here, you can see some of them are scaling up and down. And that's because I have right here, uniform scale. These are not the same right now. So if I do set it to 1, everything in the middle is big and everything at the edges is small. So I do think it looks a little better when you set these a little differently so that it just looks a little more random. But you can, adjust this if you like. Just like with the other options, we have these other scaling options. If you want things to be tall randomly too, you could do things like that just on one axis. There are some other collections that I have in here, and using them together is pretty easy. Basically, all you have to do is go in object mode, duplicate one, and then you can come over here and change this to something else. So I have one that's rocks too. Set it to rocks, and I'll change the scale to be quite a bit bigger, and I'll turn the density down pretty low so that we don't have nearly as many. But then you can just come in here, you draw where you want the rocks to be, things like that. I'll duplicate that again, and we'll make some grass. So set this to grass. This is something that I think looks better when it's really dense. So I'll make the uniform scale just the same so it doesn't scale down randomly. And we'll just turn the density up really high. And I'll just draw right here and scale it out. It looks a little weird because the ground is gray, but it will look a little better with a different color ground, and it also looks a little better in cycles. So yeah, you can play around with this. It makes it a little easier to scatter a lot of different things. Next, we have simple curve. You just draw where you want it to be, and then it's a curve. This is something that would be good for if you just need something kind of cylindrical that you want to draw. I use this a lot for things that are more stylized, like you can draw like smiles or eyebrows, things like that onto stylized characters. This could also be used for things like horns or something. That would be pretty easy if you just change this to only first right here. So we can put some horns or something onto Suzanne, and we have some horns sticking out now. But we do have some options to customize the shape of this. So right now it's kind of scaling down at both ends, but we don't have to do that if we don't want to. First of all, it's using a circle by default for the profile shape. So you can change the resolution of that right here. And you can also change the resolution of the curve right here. Shade it smooth if you want. We do have profile objects that can be used, and you just have to set it to use an object right here. And then that's where you can use the profiles collection right there. So there are some other ones. They all just have the name profile in them. This one is a star with 4 points like that. The one that I have is like an 8-pointed star, but it's smooth at the edges, which would be good for something like whipped cream. You can just turn up the twist like that. But I'm going to turn that off for now, and we'll talk about the other things. So we have length %, and we have symmetrical, which will make more sense when we talk about some of the other options. But we have the start and the end radius right here. So if we turn that up, that's going to scale the ends out like that. And we have the overall radius right here, which is going to change how thick everything gets like that. So if we move only the start radius, you'll notice both sides are scaling out. That's because we have this set to be symmetrical right now. But if I turn it off, then we can scale out each end individually like that. Now there's also this option for center, which is going to change which part is the thickest. So let's turn this up a little more. You can see it's like thick in the middle right now, but we can push that to one side like that. And when we have this set to %, which it is, then this will go from +50 to -50 like that. But if we set this to length, then this will actually use a length instead, like it'll use centimeters. So you can push it in centimeters one way or the other like that. And this is going to change depending on like how long your curve is. You know, if you want things to have the same cap size, then you might want to set this to length. But if you want it to just be a smooth curve and it's simple, then set it to %. Right now we have this set to length, so we can change the cap length right here. And if we hover over it, it'll tell you that it's in centimeters also. So let's just turn this down and we can actually see what happens as we turn it up. You can see the shape of it right here changing. Right now this is set to about 4 centimeters is where it starts scaling down like that. And if you want this to be a lot smoother, you just have to change the resolution to something smaller right here. We can set it to 0.001, something like that. And now it's a lot smoother. But if we set this to %, then we can just set the cap length to something like 50, and then it will start scaling from the very center, basically. We also have cap shapes. So this is how you can make things pointy or round, things like that. If you hover over here, you can see it says 1 is round, 0 is linear like that, and -1 is going to be pointy like that. And if you have this not symmetrical, let's turn this off, asymmetrical, you'll be able to change these individually like that. Usually what I like to do, it's just a lot faster. I set it to %, push the center just one direction like this. So I'll set it to -50 like that. And now it's completely flat at one end. If we want to turn these into actual horns, we should change the cap shape maybe to 0 so it's linear. And then we can give it a little twist like that. Okay, we also have collision, you know what that does, and we also have some noise that you can add to things. So the noise is gonna look a lot better when you have a longer curve like this. You can turn the strength up and it's gonna start distorting it and things like that. You might wanna move the scale quite a bit. So yeah, you have the option to add some distortion to your lines like that if you want. Okay, and let's look at the last one, which is volume line. This one is kind of similar, except when you draw, you'll notice that they actually kind of merge into each other like that. So this is like a remeshed volume sort of thing. If you want, you could like write your name, things like that. I do have like a tutorial that's kind of making this effect right here. It's just a lot of fun to play with. And, you know, I have a chrome material applied to it by default, so it looks pretty nice when you go to look dev. We do have some options. We have shade smooth. You can turn this off if you want it to be blocky like that. We have the voxel size, which is going to affect the quality of it. So you can turn this down quite a bit, 0.05, and it will get smoother. Obviously, we have something to control the radius, like the thickness like that. But in edit mode, you can also do Alt-S, and that will scale up curves individually like that. So that's a nice option also. And we have end shape, which is going to make the ends like blobbier. This is more apparent when you have just like a straight line. You can see that they're scaling up at the end like that. I thought this was just a fun effect, so I decided to add that in. And we do also have like a smooth mesh option. So if you don't want to use it, you can just turn it all the way down and use the smooth modifier or something like that. Or you can turn it up really high and get some interesting, you know, shapes like that where it merges. Add the end shape like that to make it blobby. You get some pretty cool shapes in here, especially when you turn on a surface and start kind of drawing things onto each other at weird angles, you'll get some interesting shapes. I did also add collision, and there's also noise that you can, affect right here. You can also use this with meshes. So I did add a separate preset for that right here, volume line mesh. You can just drag that down. And when you tab into edit mode, you'll notice that these are just normal verts that you can drag around and extrude and things like that. What's nice about this is you can add in whatever objects you want. So we can add in a cube, and let's just move that up here, and it will turn all of the edges into curves like that, turn it into like a stylized wireframe sort of thing, which I think is a lot of fun. And because it's turning it into curves, we can still, add noise to it like this, and you don't have to worry about adding a whole bunch of loops and edges and stuff. You don't have to subdivide it to get this sort of effect from the noise, which is nice. This is one of those tools that's a lot of fun to use. It's probably not going to be the most useful thing for very realistic renders and things like that, but would maybe be better for, stylized things, design. Yeah, have fun playing with all these. That's pretty much it. If you want to report a bug or suggest a feature, the best place to do that is Discord, or you can send me an email. Links for those will be in the description. Thanks for watching, and have a good one.